Hi, everyone. Good morning. I just want to thank everyone for joining us. My name is Nawaki Schwartz, and I manage the Coastal Commission's environmental justice work. Staffers Sarah Christie, Eric Martinez, and Sumi Selvaraj are also here with us, and we are so pleased to begin the public review process of the agency's draft environmental justice policy and give you all an overview today. So there's a few webinar logistics before we start. Everyone is automatically muted. If you have any questions during the chat box, and we'll answer them at the end of the session to the best of our ability. If there are any questions we can't get to, we will try and tackle them offline. So for our presentation today, we will explain why we have created an environmental justice policy, what you'll find in the policy, and why we need your input. We share updates on upcoming engagement opportunities. If you're less familiar with the Coastal Commission and why our agency set out to develop an environmental justice policy, you can learn more about our history and what we do by watching our webinar from last year. So before we start, I just want to share a little bit about the context in which we are undertaking this effort. As you know, environmental justice communities have a long history of marginalization and frustration with government agencies in their struggle for basic rights like clean water, clean air, and all too often, government inaction, or worse, adverse action on these issues has led to a mistrust of public agencies and officials, contributing to a vicious cycle of exclusion. This agency, the Coastal Commission, was created in large part because of the work of a group of dedicated activists who fought for what they believed was also a basic right: the right to enjoy nature, the right to enjoy the California coast. Back in the late 60s and early 70s, these activists didn't want to lose their coast to a wall of high-rise hotels, freeways, power plants, and endless subdivisions. Developers, realtors, oil companies, utilities, and other wealthy interest groups opposed Proposition 20, the Coastal Initiative, and outspent supporters 100-1. But the measure passed by a wide margin, and that led to the creation of the California Coastal Commission and later the Coastal Act. This made the Commission a permanent state agency with broad authority over new development along the coast. So for more than 40 years, this agency has worked to protect the coast and everyone's right to enjoy it. And we do this by regulating new development along the coast. In other words, we permit or deny new proposals and work with local governments to draft plans that reflect Coastal Act policies. And yet, despite numerous victories, the statute's vision of coastal protection and access for all people has not been fully realized. Now, we have an opportunity to make progress on that promise. On today's webinar, we're presenting the Commission's first draft environmental justice policy. By expanding the fundamental values of the Coastal Commission's coastal program into an environmental justice policy, we have an opportunity to increase the Commission's ability to help a broader swath of people that face disproportionate environmental burdens. Those inland families who come to the beach to escape the heat, those residents who don't want to see yet another industrial development in their community, and the countless people who feel priced out of even a brief stay at the coast. The policy's intent is to reflect the needs of those who have been historically left out of the process. Until we can do that, the Coastal Act's vision of coastal protection and access for all people won't be fully realized. So we have a shared goal of crafting a policy with environmental justice stakeholders that will improve coastal protection and access. To that end, we have spent this past year reaching out to, talking with, and listening to environmental justice groups and community stakeholders about how the Commission can do more. We have spoken with 58 stakeholders and co-hosted one environmental justice roundtable. The draft policy before you today is the first iteration of that effort. I'd like to take a moment to thank those of you who are on the line with us today, particularly the environmental justice groups and stakeholders who took time to speak with us. We look forward to engaging with you and invite you guidance to make this policy, your policy, as strong as possible. So at this point, I'd like to introduce one of our team members, Eric Martinez, to give some background on why and how our staff developed this draft policy.
Thanks, Nawaki. So why now? In 2016, the Coastal Commission gained authority to specifically consider environmental justice when making permit decisions. AB 2616 by Assemblywoman Autumn Burke also amended the Coastal Act to cross-reference existing civil rights law and required the governor to appoint an environmental justice commissioner. That commissioner is currently Vice Chair Effie Turnbull Sanders. Since then, we have learned being an environmental policy. At first, we approached this policy as we would any other. Staff researched and released our first public draft policy in February 2017. We learned from stakeholders, however, that doing so without first engaging with the environmental justice community was perhaps not the best approach. So we went back to the drawing board. When we started anew, staff had participated in a comprehensive racial equity and environmental justice trainings and collaborated with sister agencies before undertaking extensive public outreach efforts. The Commission formed an agency-wide environmental justice team made up of staff from every district office across California. The team created an educational webinar to inform the public about the new law, attended community meetings, hosted conference calls, and initiated one-on-one conversations with environmental justice stakeholders and communities. We created an environmental justice listserv to be able to communicate directly and easily with interested stakeholders, and created new informational materials including an environmental justice webpage, instructional handouts, and a dedicated email account. Comments and feedback were organized into broad categories that include barriers to access, tribal concerns, energy, agency outreach and engagement, and climate change, as well as staffing and hiring, policy development, permitting, housing, health, and local government. Although all the comments we received were valuable, some didn't translate easily into the policy. Because we want to go beyond the requirements of AB 2616 and embrace the spirit of this law throughout the agency, we have captured those comments for incorporation into other related efforts. To that end, we have planned a comprehensive three-phase approach to integrate the principles of environmental justice and social and racial equity throughout the Coastal Commission. The environmental justice policy should be seen as the leading effort of this larger framework. The policy will provide both the public and the Commission with the roadmap for how the agency will conduct the public's business, public decisions, and ensure equitable procedural access for all. Staff is also working with the Government Alliance on Racial Equity, also known as GARE, to draft a racial equity action plan that will inform our internal policies, such as those related to recruitment, hiring, retention, and promotion. Lastly, we are also in the process of updating our 5-year strategic plan, which will include a new chapter on environmental justice. The strategic plan will be the document that creates ongoing accountability by identifying the specific tasks necessary to successfully implement both the environmental justice policy and the equity action plan. The first version of the draft policy was released on August 9, 2018, and was recently updated. Although it is based on extensive public input, it is still subject to change based on further feedback. In the document available online, there are 2 sections: a staff memo with more details about the development of the draft policy, and the actual draft policy, which starts on page 12. The draft policy includes language recognizing the Coastal Act is inherently equitable law and commits to protecting coastal resources and providing public access and lower cost recreation opportunities for the benefit of all. It also calls on the Commission to consider environmental justice principles consistent with Coastal Act policies during the planning, decision-making, and implementation of agency actions, programs, policies, and activities. And it commits the agency to a goal of recruiting, building, and maintaining a professional staff that reflects the state's diversity, which will be spelled out in detail in the forthcoming Racial Equity Action Plan. The policy also includes a statement of principles. I'm going to now hand it over to Sumi Selvaraj, who will explain the policy in more detail.
Hi, everyone. So Eric just gave an overview of the work that's gone into the formulation of the draft policy. Now I'm going to go over what's in it. As Eric mentioned, the policy is organized around a statement of principles that, once adopted, will inform the Commission's implementation of the law. One of the principles in the is on respecting tribal concerns. We heard from many tribal members with valuable suggestions on how to improve the draft policy. The Commission respectfully acknowledges the painful history of Native American genocide in the policy. Last month, the Commission adopted the Commission's first official tribal consultation policy. The intersection of tribal consultation with environmental justice more broadly is intended to improve our relationship with tribal members and ensure they are valued and respected contributors to California's coastal management. The Commission will also work collaboratively with tribes to better understand access to and protection of areas of cultural significance, ethnobotanical resources, traditional fishing and gathering areas, and sacred sites. Among the most frequently heard requests was for us to do more meaningful community outreach and engagement with environmental justice groups, alert them about upcoming agenda items, explain how their communities might be affected, and give them concrete steps regarding what they could do. Staff has already set up a listserv to communicate more efficiently and to reach out early and often. We have also discussed possible responses, such as distributing short informational notices in more of a flyer-like format about upcoming issues in Spanish and English that can easily be shared by groups with their members. Coastal access was also a topic we received a lot of feedback on. Groups asked the Commission to recognize preserving and providing lower-cost recreational facilities as an environmental justice imperative, which we believe is part of the agency's existing commitment to maximizing public access. The draft policy also recommends a recognition of the conversion of lower-cost visitor-serving facilities to high-cost facilities as a barrier to access, and strives to achieve a no lower-cost facilities. This includes recreational opportunities as parks, trails, surf spots, beach, barbecue and fire pits, safe swimming beaches, fishing pier, campgrounds, and associated free or low-cost parking areas. We also heard from those who felt our agendas and meetings are intimidating. Full public participation that reflects the state's diversity is critical to achieving the Coastal Act's mandate for coastal protection. At the urging of environmental justice groups, the draft policy recommends identifying and eliminating barriers to our public process and striving to provide a more welcoming and understandable atmosphere, like creating the posters that Eric made, which you can actually see on the slide, and these were made to make the meeting more accessible. We have recommended scheduling items with significant environmental justice implications close to affected communities when legal deadlines allow. We also recommend arranging language translation services as needed and time extensions for translators. A number of groups also asked us to do more to create a greater measure of accountability and transparency, which is critical to building and maintaining trust and respect. Recommendation is to provide a fully transparent analysis in staff reports of how a proposed development will positively or negatively affect underserved communities. It is important to consider the technical knowledge and lived experiences of affected communities when analyzing mitigation measures. We've recommended using CalEnviroscreen or other similar tools to identify at-risk communities in our project analysis and proposing permit conditions to avoid or mitigate impacts, consistent with the Coastal Act. We also heard from groups asking the Commission to recognize how climate change will impact environmental justice and other vulnerable communities. Warming climate makes access to cooler coastal temperatures a public health imperative. Sea level rise will disproportionately impact underserved communities that may rely on public access for indigenous activities, subsistence fishing, and lower-cost recreational opportunities. We need to start acknowledging these consistently in our permitting and planning. Finally, low-income communities are also more vulnerable to climate-driven water issues that can result from seawater intrusion, contamination from extreme storm events, and drought. The draft policy recommends that the Commission take these realities into consideration when analyzing impacts, in addition to considering the best available science as outlined in the Commission's sea level rise policy guidance, which notes the importance of considering environmental justice when planning for sea level rise. Public health and the health of natural ecosystems are directly connected as well. The Commission will continue to prioritize the protection of coastal resources, including sensitive habitats, watersheds, water quality, marine biodiversity, and biological productivity for the benefit of a healthy biosphere that sustains us all. The environmental justice policy will be implemented in a way that is fully consistent with the goals of Chapter 3 policies of the Coastal Act and certified local coastal programs, and furthers the foundational mission of the statute to protect the coast for current and future generations. This will help ensure that underserved communities are not disproportionately affected or by degraded or diminished environmental services. I'm now going to give it back to Milwaukee, who is going to share more about why we want to hear from you and upcoming engagement opportunities to discuss the policy.
Thanks, Sumi. So the public comment period for the draft policy is open until November 7th of this year. After that, there will also be one additional public comment opportunity at our commission hearing in November. Any comments we receive about the draft policy will be considered as staff prepares the final version of the policy for the commission to review and adopt. Our goal is to bring a final policy before the commission at our December hearing. So your feedback on the draft environmental policy is absolutely for creating a strong final policy. Feedback on during earlier stakeholder meetings. However, we may not have covered everything, which is why we're really eager to hear from you. Our staff will follow up on each comment and provide responses to them. We will share our responses at upcoming commission hearings. So as we mentioned earlier, the draft policy might not be the best place where we can address your feedback. Our staff is also creating a racial equity plan and updating our strategic plan. So any comments that we receive for the policy will also help inform those efforts as well. And there are multiple ways you can provide your feedback. A summary of them are in our public engagement plan, which is available as an attachment on this webinar and is also available on our website. One option is to attend a public hearing and share your input directly with the commissioners. Our staff is also happy to come to you and your community and any existing meetings, or we can also schedule a one-on-one meeting to discuss the policy. And we're also taking written comments that can be emailed, sent via regular US postal mail or fax. So with that, I'd like to open up the discussion to answer any questions from the audience. As I mentioned earlier, Sarah Christie, our legislative director, is also here to help with any questions. And due to the number of participants, we're taking questions through the chat box. So please type them directly into the box and we'll read the questions out loud. We'll answer questions until about 12 p.m. and any remaining questions we'll answer via email and also post them on our website with the recording after today's presentation.
Thanks, Milwaukee. As she mentioned, please feel free to type any questions that you have and I'll read them out loud. And while we're waiting, if we're going to give it a minute to see if any questions pop up. But while everyone's online, I just want to mention that the webinar will be recorded. It's being recorded right now, and we'll post that online. And there's also 3 handouts available in the side panel, including our draft policy, the public engagement plan, and a flyer about the policy and how to access it. So we got one question, and this question asks, will there be separate opportunities to comment on the racial equity policy and/or the strategic plan?
I will take that one. This is Sarah Christie calling in from Sacramento. Yes, the racial equity policy and the strategic plan are related, but they are very separate documents and they'll follow very separate processes. So the 5-year strategic plan is a document that the commission updates, as the name would suggest, every 5 years. And we'll be starting the public review draft of our updated strategic plan in early 2019. The strategic plan covers essentially everything that the Coastal Commission does and sets out goals and outcomes and benchmarks for achieving those commission priorities. So it deals with a lot more than environmental justice. But the new updated plan will include a separate chapter on environmental justice, and that's where kind of the transparency and the accountability for how the commission is implementing both the environmental justice policy and our internal equity policies. The strategic plan is the document that the public has the opportunity to review regularly along with the commission. So the short answer is yes.
Thanks, Sarah. I have another question on the line, in the chat box. And so this asker says, can you give us a concrete example of how the Coastal Commission will apply this policy to any industrial facilities proposed on a disadvantaged community shoreline? The private for-profit corporations have many ways to obtain approvals from the Coastal Commission. Does the policy really protect us?
So I'll take this one as well. It's difficult to give a concrete example when you're speaking in theoreticals, which is obviously what this question entails. But I think the energy facility question is really a good one, because it's an issue that the Commission has struggled with in the past. So hypothetically, again, with a theoretical example, if there is some type of energy facility proposed in the coastal zone going forward, and members of that community come to the Commission with examples of how that facility is going to worsen their environmental burdens, which also will be now an area that is looked at specifically by the Coastal Commission staff in the staff report. So it will, the staff report in and of itself, which is a large part of what the Commission bases its decision on, staff reports will now include an analysis of environmental justice impacts where they exist. And an energy facility is a good example of the type of project that would raise those concerns. Additionally, when members of the community come to the Commission meeting and share their own experience and their own perspectives on the project, the Commission can now specifically take those concerns into account in terms of their final decision on the project. And that could take a variety of forms. The Commission could require the utility to meet specific conditions or change the project in some way to eliminate or lessen some of the identified impacts. This could result in additional benefits to the community to offset the impacts. Whether or not the Commission could make the findings to deny the project based on concerns that are raised regarding environmental justice, that's an open question at this point. We're in the very beginning phases of this policy formulation, and I'm sure that will be part of the conversation going forward. But we can't predict what the Commission would do on any on a theoretical proposal. But without question, this policy gives the Commission the authority to be able to change or substantially modify the project to lessen or eliminate identified impacts.
Thank you, Sarah. The next question asks, how are you getting input from those who have developmental disabilities?
We haven't actually sat down and done targeted outreach for people with developmental disabilities. As we mentioned before, we do have a number of different options. If people do want to weigh in on the draft policy, and we're certainly open, on a case-by-case basis to, talk about what a certain individual might need to weigh in on the policy and figure out a way. If anybody has any suggestions or thoughts on this, please reach out to us offline and we can talk about it.
Thank you, Nowaki. So the next question is, wood burning fire smoke prevents access to kids with asthma or others with breathing problems. Instead of smoke pollution, will you have propane fires only?
You know, the policy doesn't go into that level of specificity. That would be considered essentially an underground regulation. It would probably imperil our implementation of the policy. So the policy is not laying out specific prohibitions against any particular type of activity. It's just providing a framework under which the commission can analyze projects that come before it. So,
thank you, Sarah. So the next question is the 18-page document referenced in the staff report of the draft policy available to the public?
So yes, it is available. We have on our website an EJ page with all of our information on it. And if you have any trouble finding anything or looking for something, don't hesitate to reach out to one of us and we will happily send it to you.
Thanks, Nawaki. The next question asks, will a recording of this webinar be available on the website? And I'll take that one. I'll just say yes, we're planning to post it on. Also send it via email once, and it will be on YouTube as well with the commission's the webinar we did last year introducing the Coastal Commission and why we were developing an environmental justice policy. And the next question asks, on a project-specific level, what form should evaluation of climate change effects on environmental justice take, such as the objective methodology?
I guess I'll try to tackle that one for the group. We've been looking, as the webinar mentioned, we've been looking specifically at the impacts of sea level rise on disadvantaged communities, but you know, climate change has many impacts beyond sea level rise on disadvantaged communities. And I think that we're going, you know, the CalEnviro screen is an excellent tool for identifying those communities that are more vulnerable to these effects. And we'll be using CalEnviro screen and other similar tools to make sure that we're paying attention and we're not missing those affected communities in our permit decisions. As new methodologies come online, we'll be making as well, but it's expanding the analysis that the Coastal Commission staff does on a project-specific level.
Thanks, Sarah. So the next question is actually more of a suggestion or an ask. So it's asking if we can return to a slide that identifies opportunities to comment, and we're going to switch the slide and actually just leave that on the screen for now. I also wanted to point out that there is a handout in the side panel, and it says EJ policy announcement, and that handout also has a summary of the different opportunities to comment as well. And there's another question. The last question we have asks, the draft policy says the Commission is committed to the consideration of environmental justice principles. What are the standards, metrics for these considerations, and what procedures are in place to ensure accountability that the Coastal Commission will take tangible action to ensure environmental justice principles are upheld?
I can take that one if no one's going to take that. Am I still on mute or?
We can hear you.
Great, okay. So, I mean, that is something that we still need to discuss and talk about, in terms of accountability measures. We're, working on the draft policy, and we are obviously accountable to the commissioners and the public, but this is something that we're still working out. So, if you have, we'll certainly look at them. Thank you.
I'm going to add on that a little bit, Milwaukee, if you don't. The consideration of environmental justice principles is just essentially that, you know, specific communities should not be overly burdened by, you know, certain types of activities that are disparate or are visited upon them with greater disparity and deprived of environmental benefits. So there's a lot of room for interpretation and implementation of that. And so the accountability of the commission, obviously as staff, we're accountable to our commissioners, but our whole agency is accountable to the law. So the implementation of this policy is going to depend in no small measure to the continued engagement of environmental justice communities and advocates for those communities. And so to the extent that there's a project before the commission that is of interest to you or to specific communities, the stronger argument that you can make under the law, the more that you can demonstrate that a project may have disproportionate benefits on disproportionate impacts on a particular community, the more basis that the commission will have under the law to be able to address those concerns. So all of the commission's decisions are made in public. All of the information that they base those decisions on is public information, and that means it's not only accessible to you, it's also accessible to the courts. So that's what we mean when we say we're accountable to the law. And like any type of advocacy, the more you can base your concerns and ground them in legal principles, the stronger case you have to make. So it's 360-degree accountability. It's not just the staff and the commission, it's also the public and the courts.
Thank you, Sarah. I actually have a follow-up to that question that kind of follows, it kind of lines up with it. But the next person asked, you know, does the policy include a consideration that, you know, there's a few holding accountable via the courts and lawsuits, it requires money, and the commenter mentioned that disadvantaged communities are also highly handicapped in being able to protect our resources because of money for lawsuits. And so does the policy include this type of consideration, or, you know, are there, you know, and so I'm going to maybe hand that off to you, Sarah, but Milwaukee, if you want to add anything, feel free to.
The commission isn't in a position to fund advocacy groups. We're a regulatory agency, and that's not what we're set up to do. In terms of grant funding from other agencies and organizations, we have some information about that available on our website. But you know, it's environmental advocacy groups in general. That the problem isn't specific to just environmental justice groups. It's you know, funding is an issue for most grassroots advocacy groups, and that's just the reality of the world we live in.
Thanks, Sarah. The next question asks, the most disadvantaged communities often have the most pollution. So will you include the issue of smoke pollution on beaches regarding access to and help for those traveling to the beach from those communities?
You know, I think that the policy does touch on, you know, pollution and you know, protecting resources and ensuring the health of the coast. I think that's an interesting suggestion that we will look into. Sarah, do you have anything to add?
You know, California's on fire. Smoke pollution is a bigger and bigger problem, and I don't know how the EJ policy might be used to address it, but it's something that we'll be interested in taking a look at it, if and when it comes before us.
Thank you, Sarah and Nowaki. So the last question that I have right now, and feel free to continue typing in questions if you have any. How many other California natural resource agencies have an environmental justice policy? So there are a few other agencies that have policies. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head and within California Natural Resource Agency, so I can follow up the email to you on that question. So I apologize on not having an exact number. And another agency, though, that is updating their environmental justice policy right now is the State Lands Commission. And they're one of our sister agencies, and they're in a similar process of, State Lands Commission. And so they're in a similar process of drafting. They have a draft policy that's also out for review. And if you're interested in accessing their policy, I'd be happy to, we can send you a link to their policy as well. And then another agency that we're aware of as well in the Bay Area is San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission. They don't have an environmental justice policy, but they're updating their Bay plan for an amendment on social justice and social and environmental justice. And that is a process that has started in this last year, but they're in the beginning scoping phase. I can follow up with you later on about the exact number, though. And right now, I don't have any other questions, so we'll wait a few more minutes to see if some questions come on the line. And once again, thank you so much for being here and tuning in today. But we'll wait 5 more minutes to see if we get any questions, and if not, we'll close the webinar. Oh, I just got one. So, this question asks, how do you envision this environmental justice interacting with local coastal programs and local coastal development permits? I've heard mention of the Commission using it, but wondering about local actions.
Well, I'll take a stab at this one. AB 2616, the bill that started us on this current effort, was specific to the Coastal Commission, giving the Commission the authority to consider environmental justice in its permit decisions. So that's different than requiring local government to include environmental justice in their local coastal programs. However, we're encouraging them to do that in what we're doing throughout the state with local governments who are either preparing or amending their LCPs. But there is no specific mandate or requirement that local governments include these considerations in their LCPs at the moment.
Thanks, Sarah. The next question asks, what is an example of environmental justice? Oops, sorry, hold on a second, Nowaki. I think you're going to take it, and I just unmuted you.
Hi, so obviously this is new to the Commission, but the way I've been explaining it to members of the public is, you know, the Commission, when we make development decisions, you know, we often consider, you know, what a certain development is going to do to the environment, you know, how it's going to affect, you know, view sheds, and you know, now we have specific authority to consider, you know, potentially how it could affect an impacted community. So, you know, for example, if there's a community that's already overburdened with industrial development, we can now specifically consider what that, you know, if there's a new proposal, you know, for some sort of industrial development, we can consider how that will impact an already overburdened community. Whereas in the past, you know, we would more specifically consider what the impact would be to the environment. But do you all want to add anything more to that?
I'm wondering if I'm looking quickly through our document. There's an actual definition of environmental justice, and I don't know if that's what the questioner is getting at, but they're going to go back and take a quick look at the executive summary of our policy that might give the questioner some additional insights on what environmental justice actually is.
Thanks, Sarah and Nowaki. And just to add to that, I also recommend we provided some additional background about environmental justice in our webinar that we did last year, and maybe tying it into some of the commission's the work that we do. So I would also recommend tuning into that webinar, and if follow-up questions, you can send us an email, and we can also try to find you some other examples to point. And a quick follow-up to that question about the environmental justice is, doesn't CEQA cover environmental justice? And Maki and Sarah, do you want to mention anything about how CEQA relates to our agency, or how we interact with CEQA?
The Coastal Commission is what's called a CEQA equivalent agency. So the commission itself does not conduct. We don't serve as a lead agency for environmental review, and we don't necessarily require the preparation of an EIR or a negative declaration. The commission's analysis is equivalent under the law to CEQA. That being said, many projects do go through the CEQA process before they get to us, and the commission certainly benefits from that analysis and uses the information that is produced as part of that process. But we're not limited to that evaluation, and we're not we're not required to engage in it ourselves. So the commission's authority under the Coastal Act is similar to, but separate and distinct from CEQA itself. I'm not an expert on what CEQA requires with respect to environmental justice, but whether a certain project did or didn't get that evaluation through CEQA at the local level wouldn't affect the commission's ability to look at it when it was before our agency. And I just found the definition of environmental justice for that previous question in Government Code 65040.12e. Environmental justice is, quote, the fair treatment of people of all races, cultures, and incomes with respect to the development, adoption, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So that's the existing definition in the existing law that we are relying on and building on.
Thank you, Sarah. So one question was asking about, it was more of a suggestion, and so I'm not sure if we'll be able to, I'll read it out loud, and then Sarah Nowaki, if you want to speak to it, you can. The comment is, the former Chair Schallenberger of the Coastal Commission said that smoke prevents access and she could not go to the beach. The policy should review how their access codes address this problem. Sarah or Nowaki, do you want to answer any or say anything to that comment?
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. So our former commission chair, Mary Schallenberger, I think she, had some challenges when she would go to places with fires, and said that, for her, she felt very strongly about this, that smoke would prevent her from going to certain beaches, and that that hasn't that issue of smoke and beach access specifically, and preventing people from going to the beach hasn't come before the commission. But I think if there is a project that comes before us, I think we're going to have to kind of look at this. And you know, obviously we debate this and sort of make a decision on it, but I think it's a really interesting question.
Thanks, Nowaki. I think you cut out a little bit there, but I just wanted to, you know, specifically, I think we mentioned this before, the policy is a broad, it talks about how the commission will analyze issues of environmental justice. It is not calling out specific activities or specific types of projects or, you know, forcing any kind of review of local codes. The question of beach bonfires, which I think what the questioner is getting at in terms of smoke on the beaches, I'm saying that to distinguish it from smoke from wildfires, which is becoming ubiquitous around the state. But the issue of beach bonfires actually has been before the commission, and that is a little bit of a complicated issue when you look at it through an environmental justice lens, because beach bonfires are a popular source or a popular form of low-cost visitor serving recreation. It's a very popular activity, particularly with inland and underserved communities who come to the beach and depend on that kind of recreation for things like, you know, birthday parties and family reunions and other types of cultural celebrations that involve fires at particular times of year. And so this is the kind of thing where there's going to be a lot of competing perspectives, and you know, the environmental justice analysis will be a piece of that analysis, but it won't. I wouldn't presume that it would be the determining factor necessarily in any specific project that comes before the commission. But it's the sort of activity that we will be looking at more closely.
Thanks, Sarah. So another question we have is, how many people are on this webinar? And that's a good question. The number has been varying a lot because people have been joining throughout the webinar. And so we'll have a final number and we'll provide that in an update that we're going to do later on to the commission. But I can also send that in a follow-up email as well. So I apologize that I can't give you an exact number at the moment. It's wavered between 40 and 50 people, though. I think at the high above 50. And the next question we have is, will the environmental justice policy help to increase the equity in access to the public parks across various communities and groups?
So, you know, as Sarah said, the policy doesn't go into that kind of granular detail, but having said that, the Coastal Act is, you know, all about, a large part of the Coastal Act is about public access to the coast. So I think it's going to really, you know, I'd like to think that our policy would increase equity to access in parks that are in the coastal zone. And certainly, you know, I think that is something that the commission and staff will be considering.
Thanks, Nowaki. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that, or should I read the
No, yeah, I think that was good.
Thanks. Okay. So another, and actually just I got a comment from the audience that added something else about CEQA, and it the commenter mentions that CEQA does not require an environmental justice analysis under existing law. So thank you for providing that clarification for us. Thank you. And the next question I have is, do you all have a method for measuring these various social, environmental, and public health impacts, direct and indirect, to disadvantaged communities that might not ordinarily be considered in pre-environmental justice policy decision-making? For example, potential health impacts and healthcare costs to disadvantaged communities, and how that would, based on your decision. Does the policy consider that or allow you to? And how will you? Nowaki or Sarah?
I don't think there's any magic wand or, out of the box method that we can plug into a computer, you know what I mean? And get specific answers and models, I think the easiest, the most honest answer is we're going to be looking to the public to help us with that.
Oops, sorry. Thanks, Sarah. Nawaki, do you have anything to add?
No, I think, and I understand a lot of these questions that we've been receiving are great, and they're really on the road to thinking about this in concrete terms. But part of this too is we're looking at a draft policy, and we're also, once the policy is adopted, we're going to have to see what comes before the agency and how this will play out. So, I mean, these are great questions, and I apologize, if there's some frustration that we're not able to answer them as succinctly as we'd like to. In some cases, maybe a year from now, we'll be able to really have some more solid answers, but I think we're going to also have to see how this plays out.
Basically, the public should look at the policy as a framework for you to use, for the public to use, as well as staff to use in our analysis, as well as the commission to use in their actual decision-making capacity. But you should look at the environmental justice policy as a framework for folks to use to help you shape your comments and advocacy before the commission, consistent with the rest of the Coastal Act. That's why it's not maybe as specific as some people might like for their individual issues, but it provides a framework that will help guide the decision-making process. That's how it's intended to be used. And so that's when I say we'll be relying on you folks to help us with that. A lot of the work that grassroots organizations are doing in their own communities are far beyond what staff is able to do under the Permit Streamlining Act deadlines for a particular project. So, for instance, if folks have information about, cancer clusters in your communities, that's the kind of information now that when you bring forward, you can present it to the commission under this EJ policy framework that we're creating. If you have, information in your communities, or you have dedicated advocates who are able to do the research to get information about, low birth weights with that have been particulate matter from a certain type of industrial activity. That kind of information now is the sort of information that when it comes to the commission, it will fit into this broader framework of analysis that we're creating now. So if you can think about it in that way, when you actually read our draft analysis, and if you have suggestions of things that we might add or wording we might change or emphasize that will help you make those future arguments more effectively, that's what we're looking for at this stage in the policy development.
Thank you, Sarah. So the next question asks, in the November commission hearing and the meeting, if the public wishes to give comment on the draft, will we have to wait until it comes to that agenda item to give comment? Often this is, it's hard to predict, and there's a lot of time waiting since we can never predict when the agenda item is ready to be heard. And I'm going to give it to Nawaki, who's going to answer that question. Nawaki?
Hi, can you... Oh, okay. So there are, as we said earlier, there are going to be a lot of options for public comment. So, if you're not able to come to the November meeting or the October meeting, you can reach out to us individually, and we can talk, or you can submit an email. And so far, when we've presented the policy, it has been at the beginning of the first day of the commission meeting under the executive director's report. So the public hasn't actually had to wait that long to weigh in. Does anybody want to, Sarah or Sumi, you want to add anything?
The way the commission meetings work is that there is a public comment period for items that aren't on the agenda. But if you're at the Coastal Commission meeting to speak to a particular item, you know, the answer is yes, you do need to wait until that item comes up. But as Nowaki said, we are reporting on the EJ work under the Executive Director's report, which typically is at the very beginning of the first day of the meeting. So it shouldn't be too difficult. If you do want to travel to a commission meeting and you do want to speak publicly on the issue, it shouldn't be a terribly long or onerous wait.
Thank you, Sarah and Nowaki. So we have 2 more questions that we're going to answer since it's noon, and then we'll take any other questions via email. The next question is, will this agency be conducting any outreach to its fellow agencies in order to fulfill its mission? For example, reaching out to California state parks to request broadening low-income opportunities.
So for those of you who don't know, we have we have a staff at the commission, and then we have a 12-member appointed board who votes on projects. But in addition to that, we also have somebody from Natural Resources, from State Lands, and from Caltrans, who also, they're non-voting members, but they sit in to our meetings, and we do regularly keep in touch with our sister agencies, on topics where there's some crossover. The question is, specifically asking whether we'd reach out to state parks regarding broadening low-income opportunities. Sarah, do you know, have we done this in the past? I'm not that.
We actually have had a pretty robust ongoing relationship with state parks with respect to low-income, the visitor serving opportunities like the tent cabins in Big Sur. We recently signed a memorandum of understanding with state parks about how we're going to move forward to implement that. So we've got a pretty good discussion already going with state parks and the Coastal Conservancy in terms of ways to broaden their lower cost opportunities. We've been giving them some both in lieu fees, money that we collect from other projects in lieu of their providing lower cost visitor serving on site. We collect in lieu fees, and we've distributed some of that to state parks, and it's a robust and ongoing conversation with them.
Thank you, Sarah and Nowaki. So I'm going to read the last question that we have that we're going to answer today on the webinar, and then feel free, as I mentioned earlier, to email us any questions. And the last question is the budget and timeline online for preparation of the environmental justice policy?
The answer is yes and no. The timeline is on the website. The budget isn't have a specific budget for this effort. We've absorbed all of the costs of the preparation of this policy, and all of the training that we've done has been absorbed by our existing budget. So we're just doing it within our current resources. But the timeline is up on the website.
Right, and just to add on to what Sarah said, we have a team of, we have an environmental justice team of staff members across the agency who all actually enthusiastically volunteered to work on this policy and to help us with outreach, in addition to their current positions as either planners or in my case, PIO. So we are sort of, it's true, we are absorbing this and working on this in addition to our current workload.
Okay, well, thank you, Nowaki. We're going to end the webinar now, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your interest in the and the development of our environmental, and we hope to continue working with you and hearing more from you. So please do not hesitate to call us or email us and let us know how we can support you. Nawaki and Sarah, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, just want to echo your thanks.
Yeah, I mean, thank you again. It's really important that we get this right. So I just want to appreciate, the time schedules to be online with us today. And, please let us know, if you want to follow up about anything or if there's anything else we can help with.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to conclude. Bye-bye.